The millionaire was shocked when his little daughter ignored the 5 most beautiful girls and pointed directly at the homeless street girl. "I choose her as my sister, Daddy!" James Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city pulse with life 30 floors below. At 32, he had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most. His wife, Sarah, had been gone for 3 years now, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, alone. "Daddy." Emma's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, her blonde curls catching the morning light. "Are you still sad?" James knelt down, pulling his daughter close. Emma had been asking the same question for months now, ever since she'd started asking about having a sister. "I'm not sad when I'm with you, sweetheart. But I want a sister, Daddy, someone to play with when you're working." Her blue eyes, so much like Sarah's, looked up at him with that determined expression he knew all too well. James had spent weeks consulting with child psychologists, adoption agencies, and family counselors. The decision wasn't easy, but Emma's loneliness was breaking his heart. Finally, he'd agreed to an unconventional approach, letting Emma help choose her future sister from a carefully selected group of children who needed homes. "Remember what we talked about, Em? Today we're going to meet 5 very special girls who need families. You'll help me choose which one becomes your sister." Emma nodded solemnly. "The pretty ones you showed me in the pictures?" "That's right. My assistant Patricia spent months finding the most wonderful girls in New York." James had indeed requested that the candidates be selected not just for their need for homes, but for their potential to fit into their world. Well-educated, well-mannered children who could adapt to their lifestyle. As they prepared to leave for the first meeting, Emma suddenly stopped at the entrance to their building's lobby. Through the glass doors, James could see a small figure huddled near the gate of their exclusive condominium complex. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better days. She held a cardboard sign, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Daddy, who is that girl? Just someone asking for help, sweetheart. Come along." But Emma pressed her face against the glass, studying the girl intently. Something flickered in her expression, recognition, perhaps. But that was impossible. Emma had never been outside their protected world alone. "She's always there," Emma whispered. James paused. Always there. How would Emma know that? He made a mental note to ask their doorman about increased security, but right now they had appointments to keep. As their black sedan pulled away, James caught Emma looking back at the girl one more time. In that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully planned day was about to take an unexpected turn. Little did he know that by evening, everything he thought he knew about choices, family, and his own daughter would be turned completely upside down. The Wellington Foundation's private office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Chrysler Building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan. Patricia Henderson, James's longtime assistant and closest confidant, had transformed the main conference room into something that felt more like an elegant living room than a business meeting space. Soft, classical music played in the background, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and comfortable seating areas had been arranged to make the children feel at ease. James adjusted his tie nervously as he and Emma entered the room. 5 carefully selected girls sat with their respective caseworkers, each one impeccably dressed and poised beyond their years. These weren't just any children from the system. Patricia had spent 3 months identifying candidates who would seamlessly integrate into their world of private schools, charity galas, and international travel. "Mr. Wellington, Emma, welcome," Patricia said, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her indispensable over the past 8 years. "I'd like you to meet our exceptional young ladies." Emma clung to her father's hand, her small fingers trembling slightly. Despite all their preparation and conversations, the reality of choosing a sister felt overwhelming. First, we have Madison Thompson, age 8, from the prestigious Riverside Academy. Patricia began, gesturing to a girl with perfectly styled auburn hair and emerald eyes. Madison speaks French, Spanish, and Mandarin fluently, and she's been playing violin since she was 4. Madison rose gracefully, her posture perfect, offering a small curtsy that would have impressed European royalty. "Bonjour, Mr. Wellington. C'est un plaisir de vous rencontrer," she said, then switched seamlessly to English. "I'm very pleased to meet you both." James watched Emma's reaction carefully. His daughter nodded politely, but her enthusiasm seemed forced, mechanical. Next is Sofia Castellanos, also 8 years old, from St. Catherine's Home for Exceptional Children, Patricia continued. Sophia has been studying ballet at the American Ballet Theatre's children's program and maintains a 4.0 GPA in accelerated academics. Sophia stood and performed a perfect pirouette, her movements fluid and graceful, followed by a series of complex ballet positions that earned appreciative murmurs from the adults in the room. "That was beautiful," Emma whispered, but James noticed she seemed more impressed than emotionally connected. The introductions continued methodically. Grace Winters, a 9-year-old prodigy artist whose paintings had already been displayed in several Manhattan galleries. Her portfolio showcased works that rivaled those of artists twice her age. Rebecca Chen, an 8-year-old who spoke 5 languages and had already been accepted into Columbia University's Youth Enrichment Program. And finally, Charlotte Evans, a 7-year-old piano virtuoso who had performed at Carnegie Hall. Charlotte's fingers danced across the portable keyboard Patricia had provided, playing a complex piece by Chopin with the skill of a seasoned concert pianist. The melody filled the room, hauntingly beautiful and technically flawless. Each girl was remarkable in her own right, exactly what James had envisioned for Emma's sister. They were intelligent, cultured, talented, and would fit seamlessly into their world without requiring any major adjustments to their lifestyle or social circle. "Well, Emma," James asked gently, kneeling beside his daughter, "what do you think? Would you like to spend some individual time with any of these wonderful girls?" Emma looked at each candidate carefully, her blue eyes serious and thoughtful. Her small hands were folded neatly in her lap, a gesture she'd learned from watching her mother at formal events. "They're all very nice, Daddy," she said quietly, but James could hear the hesitation in her voice. "But," he prompted, knowing his daughter well enough to sense there was more. "Can we go home now? I want to think about it," Emma said, not meeting his eyes. Patricia looked genuinely surprised. They had planned for Emma to make her initial choice today, with legal paperwork ready to begin the adoption process immediately. The timeline had been carefully orchestrated to minimize disruption to everyone involved. "Of course, sweetheart," James said, though he felt a knot of concern forming in his stomach. "We don't have to decide anything today." As their black sedan navigated through the busy Manhattan streets toward home, Emma pressed her face against the tinted window, her breath fogging the glass as she scanned the sidewalks intently. When they approached their building, she suddenly sat up straighter, her entire body tense with anticipation. "Daddy, stop the car," she said urgently. "What is it, Em?" "I want to talk to that girl, the one with the sign." James felt his heart sink. "Emma, that's not. We can't just approach strangers on the street. It's not safe. Please, Daddy, just for a minute. I promise I'll be careful." Against every instinct he possessed, James instructed their driver to pull over. The girl looked up as they approached, her dark eyes wary but undeniably intelligent. Up close, James could see she was probably 8 or 9, with an alertness in her gaze that her desperate circumstances couldn't diminish. "What's your name?" Emma asked, stepping closer than James was comfortable with, but he found himself unable to intervene. "Lucy," the girl whispered, clutching her cardboard sign tighter. "I'm Emma. Are you hungry, Lucy?" Lucy nodded, and in that moment, something passed between the two girls that James couldn't quite understand. A recognition, a connection that transcended their vastly different circumstances. That evening, Emma sat at their formal dining table, barely touching the gourmet meal their private chef had prepared. James watched his daughter push her grilled salmon around her china plate, her mind clearly miles away from their elegant penthouse dining room with its crystal chandelier and original Monet hanging on the wall. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft, classical music that always played during dinner and the distant sounds of the city far below. This had become their routine since Sarah's death. Quiet, polite meals that felt more like business meetings than family time. "Em, talk to me," James said finally, setting down his fork. "What's bothering you about those girls today? They were all wonderful, accomplished, exactly the kind of sisters I thought you wanted." Emma looked up at him with those serious blue eyes that reminded him so painfully of Sarah. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully, as if what she was about to say would change everything between them. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret? A really big secret that I've been keeping?" "Of course, sweetheart. You know you can tell me anything," James said, though something in her tone made him suddenly nervous. Sometimes when you're working late in your office, I sneak out to the garden at night." James felt his blood run cold. Their penthouse had a private rooftop garden, accessible through the master bedroom suite, but the thought of Emma wandering around alone at night, 30 floors above the street, terrified him beyond reason. "Emma, that's very dangerous. The garden isn't lit at night, and if you fell—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why have you been going out there alone?" "Because I wanted to see the stars like Mommy used to show me before she got sick," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "Remember how she used to take me up there and point out all the constellations? She said the stars were angels watching over us." James's throat tightened. He'd avoided the garden completely since Sarah's death, unable to face the memories it contained. "And from up there," Emma continued, "I can see down to the street really clearly. I can see all the way to the park and the bus stops and everything." She paused, fidgeting with her linen napkin, clearly working up the courage to continue. "I've been watching Lucy for weeks, Daddy. She doesn't just ask for money during the day. At night, she sleeps on that bench across from our building, the one by the fountain. She has nightmares and cries sometimes, and she talks to herself when she thinks no one can hear her." James felt his heart breaking as he realized how much his daughter had been observing, how much pain she'd been witnessing while he'd been buried in his work, trying to lose himself in business deals and board meetings. "And there's something else," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lucy talks to herself sometimes, but she's not really talking to herself, Daddy. She's talking to someone who isn't there, someone she misses terribly." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She says things like, 'Yes, Mama, I'm being brave, and I promise, Mama, I won't forget what you taught me, and Mama, I found her just like you said I would.' She talks exactly like I do when I talk to Mommy in my dreams." The realization hit James like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Emma had been watching this homeless girl grieve, watching her process loss and abandonment, and in Lucy, she had recognized a kindred spirit going through the same devastating experience. "Emma," he said carefully, "is that why you want Lucy to be your sister, because you both lost your mothers?" Emma nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "She needs us, Daddy, really, really needs us. And I think Mommy would want us to help her. Mommy always said we should help people who are hurting." James pulled his daughter close, his own eyes filling with tears as he realized the incredible burden Emma had been carrying. While he'd been focused on maintaining their controlled, protected world, His 7-year-old daughter had been grappling with complex emotions and moral obligations that would challenge most adults. "Let me make some phone calls," he whispered into her hair, knowing that what she was asking was complicated, potentially dangerous, and completely outside the realm of possibility. But as he held Emma, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs, James realized that his carefully controlled world was about to face its biggest challenge yet. What James didn't know was that Lucy's story was far more complicated and connected to their lives than anyone could imagine. The next morning, James sat in his mahogany-paneled office on the 58th floor of the Wellington Industries building, making phone calls that would normally be unthinkable for someone in his position. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his antique Persian rug, but James barely noticed the spectacular view of Central Park spread out below. His first call was to Detective Michael Torres, an old friend from Harvard who now worked with the NYPD's Missing Persons Unit. They'd maintained their friendship over the years, despite their vastly different career paths, bonding over their shared love of baseball and their experience as single fathers. "Mike, I need a favor, and I know how this is going to sound," James began, pacing behind his desk. "Let me guess, you're calling about a woman, and it's complicated," Torres laughed. "What's her name?" "It's not a woman, it's a child, a homeless girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. First name Lucy, no last name that I know of. She's been living on the streets near my building." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "James, you're asking me to run background on a homeless kid with no identification. That's not exactly standard procedure, and it's definitely not something I can do as a favor for a friend." "Mike, my daughter wants to adopt this girl. I need to know if she's safe to be around Emma. Is she a runaway? Are there family members looking for her? Has she been involved in anything dangerous? I can't just ignore this, but I also can't put my daughter at risk." Torres sighed deeply. "James, this is opening a can of worms you might not want to deal with. Sometimes these kids are on the streets for reasons you don't want to uncover. Sometimes they're running from things that are worse than homelessness. I understand the risks, but I have to know. Emma is convinced this girl needs our help, and you know how perceptive Emma has been since Sarah died. She sees things that adults miss." "All right," Torres said reluctantly. "Let me ask around discreetly. I'll check with the runaway task force, see if anyone matching her description has been reported missing. But James, if this goes sideways, if this kid is connected to anything dangerous—" "I know. I'll handle whatever comes up." James's second call was to Dr. Amanda Foster, the child psychologist who'd been helping him and Emma process their grief over the past year. Dr. Foster had been recommended by Mount Sinai's Pediatric Psychology Department, and her sessions with Emma had been invaluable in helping his daughter cope with the loss of her mother. "Dr. Foster, I need your professional opinion about something. Hypothetically speaking, what would you think about Emma forming an attachment to a homeless child she's been observing from a distance?" "Mr. Wellington, that's quite specific for a hypothetical question," Dr. Foster said with a slight chuckle. "But to answer your question, children often project their own emotional needs onto others they perceive as helpless or vulnerable. Emma may see herself in this girl's situation. Both have experienced loss. Both are dealing with feelings of powerlessness and abandonment in different ways. So her wanting to help could be healthy. It could be extremely healthy, actually. It could represent Emma taking control of her grief by channeling it into positive action, or it could be Emma trying to save herself by saving someone else, which could lead to disappointment and further trauma if the situation doesn't work out as she hopes." Dr. Foster paused thoughtfully. "Without meeting this child, I can't make a definitive assessment. But James, Emma's instincts about people have been remarkably accurate since her mother's death. Grief can heighten children's emotional intelligence and their ability to recognize pain in others. That afternoon, James did something he hadn't done in years. He walked the streets around his building instead of being driven everywhere in his armored sedan. He wanted to observe Lucy without her knowledge, to understand what Emma had been seeing from their rooftop garden night after night. He found her in Thompson Square Park, 2 blocks from his building, sitting alone on a swing set that had seen better days. She was moving slowly back and forth, her feet barely touching the ground. She was cleaner than she'd been the day before, and James wondered where she'd managed to wash up and change clothes. As he watched from behind a large oak tree, Lucy pulled out a small, worn photograph from the pocket of her jacket. The photo was obviously precious to her. She handled it with extreme care, as if it might disintegrate at any moment. She stared at it for a long moment, then pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. "Mama, I'm trying to be brave like you taught me," she whispered, and James felt his heart break a little. "I found her, Mama, the brave girl you told me about, but I don't know how to talk to her without scaring her daddy." James felt his breath catch. How could Lucy know about Emma? How could she possibly know anything about their family? But then something even stranger happened. Lucy looked up from her photograph, directly toward the building where James lived, scanning the upper floors until her gaze settled on the penthouse level. She waved, just slightly, as if she could see someone waving back. James turned to look up at his building and felt his pulse quicken. There, barely visible in the rooftop garden, was a small figure silhouetted against the sky. Emma was there, waving back. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. This wasn't a one-sided observation. Both girls had been watching each other, communicating across an impossible distance, forming a connection that transcended their different worlds. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, what did Lucy know about his family that she shouldn't know? Detective Torres called James that evening with news that made everything infinitely more complicated. James was in his study, trying to focus on quarterly reports, when his phone rang with the distinctive tone he'd assigned to Mike's number. "James, you need to sit down for this," Torres said without preamble. "Lucy Morrison, age 8, disappeared from foster care 6 months ago. Her caseworker assumed she was just another runaway statistic, but here's where it gets interesting. She was placed in care after her mother died in a car accident last winter." James felt his pulse quicken. The timing was significant. Sarah had died just over a year ago, which meant both girls had lost their mothers within months of each other. "Tell me about the mother," James said, reaching for a legal pad to take notes. "Dr. Elena Morrison, 34 years old, pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. She was driving home from the hospital during that massive snowstorm we had in February, when she lost control of her car on the FDR drive. She was working a double shift, hadn't slept in over 24 hours. James felt a chill run down his spine. Mount Sinai was where Sarah had received her cancer treatments. What happened to Lucy after her mother died? "This is where it gets ugly," Torres continued. "Lucy was supposed to go to her aunt in California, but the aunt never showed up to claim her. Turned out the aunt had a record for drug possession and domestic violence. Child Protective Services wouldn't approve the placement. So she went into foster care? Worse, she was placed with the Henderson family in Queens, and James, this family has been investigated multiple times for neglect and emotional abuse. They take in kids for the monthly payments, but they don't actually take care of them. Lucy disappeared from their home 3 months ago, and honestly, no one tried very hard to find her. The pieces were starting to fall into place for James. A doctor's daughter would be intelligent, articulate, well-educated despite her current circumstances. But there was still something that didn't make sense. "Mike, I need you to do me one more favor. And this is important. Can you find out if Dr. Elena Morrison ever had any connection to Mount Sinai's oncology department? Specifically, if she ever treated patients in the pediatric oncology wing? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. James, why would you ask that specific question? Just please, check for me. I have a feeling this is all connected somehow. 2 hours later, Torres called back with information that made James's hands shake as he gripped the phone. James, Dr. Elena Morrison wasn't just connected to the pediatric oncology wing. She was Sarah's surgeon. She performed the operation that removed Sarah's tumor and gave her those extra 3 months with Emma. The room seemed to spin around James. The coincidence was impossible, yet the facts were undeniable. There's more, Torres continued, his voice gentle now as he realized the emotional impact of what he was revealing. I spoke to some nurses who worked with Dr. Morrison. They said she used to talk about her cases, particularly one little girl in the pediatric ward who was so brave during her mother's treatment that it inspired Eleanor to push harder, to try experimental procedures she might not have attempted otherwise. Emma, James whispered. Elena Morrison knew your daughter, James. She talked about Emma constantly, said that watching Emma's courage during Sarah's treatment reminded her why she became a doctor in the first place. And if Lucy heard her mother's stories about the incredibly brave little girl who lived in the fancy building across from the hospital. James's mind reeled as the full picture came into focus. Lucy wasn't camped out near their building by coincidence. She was there because her mother had told her about Emma, had probably described their building, had shared stories about the little girl who never cried even when her mother was dying. James, there's something else you need to know, Torres said carefully. Lucy's case file mentions trauma-induced selective mutism following her mother's death. She hasn't spoken to any adults in the system since the accident. But neighbors at the Henderson house reported seeing her talking to herself frequently, usually while looking at a photograph. She talks to her mother's picture, James said, remembering what Emma had told him. That's not all. The neighbors also reported that Lucy would stand at the window of her foster home and stare toward Manhattan for hours at a time. James, I think this kid has been looking for Emma ever since her mother died. The magnitude of what Torres was revealing hit James like a tidal wave. Both girls had been grieving, both had been searching for connection, and somehow, across the vast expanse of New York City, they had found each other. But why hadn't Lucy simply approached them directly? Why was she living on the streets instead of asking for help? As if reading his thoughts, Torres provided the final piece of the puzzle. James, after what Lucy went through with the Henderson family, she doesn't trust adults anymore, but she still believed in her mother's stories about the brave little girl. I think she's been trying to find a way to connect with Emma without involving any grown-ups. The picture was now complete, and James realized that both girls had been carrying an incredible burden of grief and hope, waiting for the right moment to reach out to each other. That night, James climbed the stairs to the rooftop garden for the first time since Sarah's death. He found Emma there, wrapped in one of Sarah's cashmere blankets, sitting on the stone bench where she used to read bedtime stories under the stars. The city sparkled below them like a galaxy, and Central Park stretched out in the distance like a dark oasis. Emma, we need to talk about Lucy, James said, settling beside his daughter on the bench. Emma turned to him with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older than her 7 years. In the moonlight, she looked so much like Sarah that James felt his breath catch. You found out about her mommy, didn't you? She said simply. James felt his world tilt on its axis. What do you know about Lucy's mother? Everything, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucy told me all about her. Her mommy was Dr. Elena, and she was an angel who helped sick people get better. She worked at the same hospital where we took mommy for her treatments." Emma paused, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders as a cool breeze swept across the rooftop. Lucy said her mommy used to tell her stories about her patients, especially about one little girl who was so brave that it made her mommy want to work harder to save people. She said her mommy called this little girl the brave angel who lived in a castle in the sky and never cried, even when her mommy was very sick. Tears began streaming down Emma's face as she continued. "Daddy, Lucy's mommy told her about me. She described our building, our garden, even the way I used to wave from up here when we were leaving for the hospital. Dr. Elena was mommy's doctor, wasn't she?" James could barely speak through his own tears. "How long have you known?" Since the very first night I saw her down there," Emma said, pointing toward the street below. "She was crying and holding a picture, and I heard her say, 'Mama, I found the brave girl from your stories, but I don't know how to talk to her without her daddy sending me away.' And I knew Daddy. I knew her mommy was the doctor who gave us those extra months with mommy before she went to heaven." The weight of the revelation settled over James like a heavy blanket. Lucy hadn't been placed near their building by coincidence or even by her own random choice. In her grief and trauma, she had sought out the one connection she had left to her mother, the story of the brave little girl her mother had admired and talked about constantly. "Emma, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why have you been carrying this secret alone?" "Because I was scared," Emma admitted, her voice breaking. "I was scared you'd call the police and they'd take her away before I could help her. Lucy's mommy saved our mommy Daddy. She gave us more time together. Now we have to save Lucy." James looked at his daughter, realizing that while he had been drowning in his own grief and trying to control every aspect of their protected world, Emma had been living with this enormous knowledge, carrying this sense of responsibility and moral obligation on her small shoulders. The other girls today, the ones Patricia chose, "They're very nice, Daddy, and they're smart and talented," Emma said, "but they don't need us the way Lucy needs us. They'll find good families who can give them everything they want. But Lucy only has us, and I don't need a sister who's perfect, Daddy. I need a sister who understands what it's like to lose your mommy and still have to be brave every day." James felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time as he understood the depth of his daughter's compassion and wisdom. Emma's choice wasn't about wanting a sister or even about honoring a debt to Dr. Morrison. It was about recognizing that sometimes the people who need us most aren't the ones who seem perfect on paper, but the ones who share our deepest wounds and can help us heal together. "Lucy's been living on the streets for months, sweetheart. She's probably scared, possibly traumatized, definitely in need of medical care and psychological support." "I know," Emma said firmly, "but she's also the strongest person I've ever seen except for Mommy. And Daddy, when I talk to her from up here, when she waves back at me, I don't feel so alone anymore." James held his daughter under the stars that Sarah used to point out to them, realizing that bringing Lucy into their world wouldn't just be about saving her, it would be about saving all of them. But as the city hummed with life far below them, James couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would unleash consequences none of them were prepared for, and that their carefully controlled world was about to become something completely unpredictable. The next morning, James made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. He called Patricia into his office and instructed her to cancel all meetings for the day, then contacted the city's most expensive family law attorney, Margaret Chen, whose firm specialized in high-profile adoptions and custody cases. "Mrs. Chen, I need to adopt a child who's currently classified as a runaway from the foster system. I need this done quickly, properly, and without media attention." Margaret Chen had handled adoptions for celebrities, politicians, and billionaires, but even she seemed taken aback by the request. Mr. Wellington, adopting a runaway is extraordinarily complex. The child would need to be returned to state custody first, then go through the standard evaluation process. We're talking about months, possibly years. I don't have years, James said firmly. This child has been living on the streets because the foster system failed her. Every day she's out there, she's in danger. I understand your concern, but there are protocols. Child services will want extensive background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations for both you and Emma. They'll question why you're choosing this particular child over the thousands of others in the system. James spent the morning making calls to everyone he knew in city government, leveraging relationships built over years of charitable donations and political contributions. By noon, he had managed to arrange an emergency meeting with the head of Child Protective Services. Meanwhile, Emma had convinced their building's security to let her visit Lucy in the park. James found them sitting together on the swing set, Emma gently combing Lucy's tangled hair with a small brush she'd brought from home. "Lucy, this is my daddy," Emma said as James approached. "Daddy, Lucy wants to tell you something important." Lucy looked up at James with those intelligent dark eyes, and for the first time she spoke directly to an adult. "Thank you for being kind to me, Mr. Wellington. My mama told me that Emma's daddy was a good man who loved his family very much." James knelt down to Lucy's eye level, his heart breaking at the trust he saw in her face. "Lucy, would you like to come home with us? Emma and I want you to be part of our family." Tears filled Lucy's eyes as she nodded, but then her expression became worried. "But what if the bad people come looking for me? What if they try to take me back to the mean house?" "What bad people?" James asked gently. Emma squeezed Lucy's hand encouragingly. "Tell him about the Hendersons." Lucy's voice became barely a whisper. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson said I was worthless, that nobody would ever want me because my mama was dead. They locked me in my room when I cried, and they took the picture of my mama away from me." James felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and reassuring. "Lucy, those people will never hurt you again. I promise you that." That afternoon, James sat in the sterile offices of Child Protective Services with Margaret Chen, facing a bureaucracy that seemed designed to prevent rather than facilitate adoptions. The caseworker assigned to Lucy's case, a tired-looking woman named Janet Rodriguez, shuffled through papers with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Wellington, I appreciate your willingness to help, but Lucy Morrison is considered a flight risk. She's run away twice now, and we have concerns about her psychological state." "She ran away from an abusive home," James said, struggling to keep his temper in check. "Have you investigated the Henderson family?" "The Hendersons have been cleared of any wrongdoing," Rodriguez replied curtly. "Lucy's claims couldn't be substantiated." Margaret Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Rodriguez, my client is prepared to provide Lucy with the best possible care, private tutoring, therapy, medical attention, everything she needs to recover from her trauma." "The system doesn't work that way," Rodriguez said. "Lucy needs to be returned to approved foster care while the adoption process proceeds through proper channels." "Absolutely not," James said, standing up. "I won't allow that child to be put back into a situation where she might be harmed." "Then I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do today," Rodriguez said, closing Lucy's file with finality. As they left the building, Margaret Chen put a hand on James's arm. "There is another way, but it's risky. We could petition for emergency custody based on Lucy's medical and psychological needs. If we can prove that returning her to foster care would cause immediate harm." "Do it," James said without hesitation, "whatever it takes." That evening, as Emma and Lucy sat together in the penthouse living room, sharing dinner and watching a movie, James made another call to Detective Torres. "Mike, I need everything you can find on Robert and Susan Henderson, every complaint, every investigation, every piece of paper that exists about them. James, what are you planning? I'm going to make sure Lucy never has to go back there. And if that means exposing the failures of the foster system, then that's what I'll do. As he watched Emma and Lucy giggling together on the sofa, James realized that he was no longer just trying to give Emma a sister. He was fighting for both girls' futures, and he wasn't going to lose this battle. Lucy's first night in the Wellington penthouse was anything but peaceful. James had arranged for her to have the guest bedroom next to Emma's room, complete with new clothes, toys, and everything a little girl could need. But luxury couldn't erase months of trauma and fear. At 2 a.m., James was awakened by Emma shaking his shoulder. "Daddy, Lucy is having a nightmare and she won't wake up." James rushed to the guest room to find Lucy thrashing in her bed, tears streaming down her face as she called out for her mother. When he tried to gently wake her, she recoiled in terror, cowering against the headboard. "Don't hurt me," she whispered. "I'll be good, I promise I'll be good." Emma climbed onto the bed and took Lucy's hands. "Lucy, it's me, Emma. You're safe now. You're in our house, remember?" Slowly, Lucy's eyes focused, and she recognized where she was. But the fear didn't leave her face entirely. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to be loud. Please don't send me away." James felt his heart break all over again. "Lucy, sweetheart, you're not going anywhere. This is your home now." The next few days were a careful dance of adjustment. Lucy was polite to a fault, barely eating, afraid to touch anything in case she broke something valuable. She would ask permission before sitting down, before speaking, before even going to the bathroom. Doctor Foster came to the house for an evaluation, and her assessment was sobering. Lucy is exhibiting classic signs of complex trauma and attachment disorder. She's been conditioned to believe that her worth depends on being invisible and causing no trouble. "How do we help her?" James asked. "Time, patience, and consistency. She needs to learn that she's valued for who she is, not for how little space she takes up in the world." Emma, meanwhile, became Lucy's fierce protector and interpreter. She seemed to instinctively understand what Lucy needed, whether it was space to be alone or gentle encouragement to try something new. "Lucy hasn't played with toys in a really long time," Emma explained to James one evening. "She told me the Hendersons said toys were for good children, and she was never good enough." James watched as Emma patiently showed Lucy how to work the remote control for the television, how to ask the kitchen staff for snacks, how to use the intercom system to call for help if she needed anything. But the real breakthrough came on the 4th day, when Lucy finally asked for something she wanted. "Mr. Wellington?" She said quietly, finding James in his study. Could I maybe call you something else? Mr. Wellington sounds like the mean teachers at school." "What would you like to call me?" James asked, looking up from his laptop. "Emma calls you Daddy, but I don't know if I'm allowed." James set aside his work completely and knelt down to Lucy's level. "Lucy, you can call me whatever feels right to you. If you want to call me Daddy, that would make me very happy. But if that doesn't feel comfortable yet, that's okay too." Lucy considered this seriously. "Could I call you Dad, James, like both names together?" "I would love that," James said, and meant it completely. That night at dinner, Lucy ate a full meal for the first time since arriving. She even asked for seconds of the chef's famous chocolate cake, then immediately looked terrified that she'd been too greedy. "Lucy," Emma said matter-of-factly, "we have like a whole kitchen full of food. You can eat as much as you want. That's what families do." "Really?" Lucy asked. "Really," James confirmed. "In fact, tomorrow we're going to take you shopping for clothes and books and anything else you need." Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement, then dimmed with worry. "But what if the social worker comes and says I have to go back? What if she says I'm not supposed to have nice things?" James and Emma exchanged a look. They hadn't told Lucy about the legal battle still raging over her custody, hadn't wanted to worry her with adult problems. "Lucy," James said carefully, "I want you to know that I'm working very hard to make sure you can stay with us forever. But even if some grown-ups try to say you have to leave, Emma and I will never stop fighting for you." That night, for the first time since arriving, Lucy didn't have nightmares. Instead, James found both girls asleep in Emma's bed, holding hands, with Lucy's precious photograph of her mother tucked safely between them on the pillow. But outside, in the shadows across the street, a dark sedan had been parked for hours, its occupants watching the building with intense interest. The legal battle for Lucy was about to become much more complicated. The call came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Margaret Chen's voice was tense with urgency as she spoke to James over the phone. "James, we have a problem. Robert Henderson is claiming that Lucy stole money from him before she ran away. He's filed a police report and is demanding that she be returned to his custody immediately." James felt his blood turn to ice. "That's impossible. Lucy is 8 years old and she's been living on the streets for months." "I know it's ridiculous, but Henderson has some kind of evidence, bank statements showing cash withdrawals that supposedly match money missing from his house. He's claiming that Lucy has behavioral problems that make her unsuitable for adoption." James looked across the breakfast table where Lucy and Emma were sharing pancakes and giggling over a comic book. Lucy had finally started to smile, to act like the child she was supposed to be. "What does this mean for us?" "It means Child Protective Services is reopening Lucy's case. They want to interview her, and Henderson is demanding the right to see her as her legal guardian." "Over my dead body," James said flatly. After hanging up, James struggled with how much to tell the girls. He decided to be honest but gentle, pulling them both aside in the living room. "Girls, I need to tell you something important. Some people are trying to say that Lucy has to go back to her old foster home." Lucy's face went white with terror. "No," she whispered. "Please, Dad, James, don't let them take me back. I'll be really good, I promise." Emma grabbed Lucy's hand fiercely. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. Tell him, Daddy." "I'm going to fight this with everything I have," James said firmly. "But Lucy, the lawyers might need to ask you some questions about what happened at the Henderson house. Are you brave enough to tell them the truth?" Lucy nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Mr. Henderson was mean to all the kids. He made us work in the basement, cleaning things and sorting things for his business. And Mrs. Henderson said if we told anyone, they'd put us in juvenile hall where even worse things would happen." James felt his stomach turn. "What kind of work, sweetheart?" "Cleaning electronics, taking apart phones and computers. He said we had to remove all the important parts and put them in different boxes. I didn't understand why, but the older kids said he was selling the parts to people who weren't supposed to have them." James exchanged a meaningful look with Emma, who was old enough to understand the implications. Henderson wasn't just abusing children. He was running some kind of illegal operation, using them as unpaid labor. "Lucy, the money Mr. Henderson says you stole, do you know anything about that?" "I never took any money," Lucy said, tears starting to flow. But the night before I ran away, I heard Mr. Henderson talking on the phone about how someone had stolen from him. He was really angry, yelling about how he was going to make the kids pay for it." "Who else was in the house when you left?" "Tommy was still there, and Sarah, and the new boy whose name I never learned. Tommy was really scared because Mr. Henderson had been blaming him for things all week." James realized that Lucy might have been framed for Henderson's missing money to cover up his illegal activities or to deflect attention from his real financial problems. That afternoon, Detective Torres came to the penthouse with news that changed everything. "James, I did some digging on Robert Henderson like you asked. This guy has been under investigation by the FBI for months. They think he's been running a stolen electronics operation using foster kids as free labor to strip valuable components. Can we use this to protect Lucy? It gets better. Henderson's bank records show large cash deposits that don't match his reported income. The money he claims Lucy stole, it never existed. He's been cooking his books to hide the illegal income. James felt a surge of hope. So Lucy is innocent? More than that, she's a potential witness in a federal case. The FBI has been looking for someone who can testify about Henderson's operation, if Lucy is willing to talk to them. She's 8 years old, Mike. She's been through enough trauma. I know. But James, this might be the only way to ensure that Henderson can never get custody of her again. If he's facing federal charges, CPS will have to reconsider his fitness as a foster parent. That evening, James sat with both girls in Emma's room, explaining the situation as simply as he could. Lucy, some very important police officers want to ask you about Mr. Henderson's business. You would be helping to make sure he can never hurt other children the way he hurt you. Lucy was quiet for a long time, staring at the photograph of her mother that she still carried everywhere. My mama always said that when you know something is wrong, you have to be brave enough to tell the truth, even when it's scary. She looked up at James with determination in her eyes. I want to help stop him. Other kids shouldn't have to be scared like I was. Emma squeezed her sister's hand. We'll be with you the whole time. James felt overwhelming pride in both girls' courage, but he also knew that the real battle was just beginning. Henderson wouldn't go down without a fight, and there was no telling what other secrets might come to light in the process. The FBI interview was scheduled for the following Monday at a child-friendly facility designed specifically for young witnesses. James, Emma, and Dr. Foster accompanied Lucy, who clutched her mother's photograph and a small stuffed elephant that Emma had given her for courage. Special Agent Sarah Martinez had years of experience interviewing child witnesses, and she made Lucy feel as comfortable as possible in the bright, cheerful room filled with toys and comfortable seating. Lucy, you're very brave for coming here today, Agent Martinez said gently. I just want you to tell me about your time with the Henderson family. Take your time, and remember that you're safe now. Lucy spoke quietly but clearly about the long hours in the basement, the electronics they were forced to dismantle, the threats about what would happen if they told anyone. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity and honesty. But then Agent Martinez asked a question that changed everything. Lucy, did you ever see Mr. Henderson meet with other adults, people who came to pick up the boxes of electronics parts? Lucy nodded. There was one man who came a lot. He was always really nice to me, which was weird because most adults were mean at that house. Can you describe him? He was tall and had grey hair, and he wore really expensive suits like Dad James wears. He always asked about me specifically, like he knew who I was. James felt a chill run down his spine. Did he ever say anything to you directly? Just once, Lucy said, her voice becoming thoughtful. He said I looked just like my mama, and that my mama had been a very special doctor who helped his family once. He said he was sorry about what happened to her. Agent Martinez leaned forward with interest. Did he tell you his name? Mr. Henderson called him Mr. W. something. I couldn't hear the whole name. James's blood turned to ice as the pieces fell into place. He excused himself from the room and immediately called Margaret Chen. Margaret, I need you to run a background check on someone. Cross-reference any business dealings between Wellington Industries and Robert Henderson or any electronics companies he might be connected to. Mijou, 30 minutes later, Margaret called back with information that made James's world crumble. James, sit down. Wellington Industries has been purchasing recycled electronics components from a company called Metro Electronics Recycling for the past 2 years. The contracts were negotiated by your Uncle Richard. Richard Wellington, James's uncle and the former CEO of Wellington Industries, had been like a father to James after his parents died. James had trusted him completely, never questioning the business decisions Richard made before retiring. Margaret, are you saying that my uncle has been knowingly buying stolen electronics from Henderson? It's worse than that. I found email correspondence between Richard and Henderson going back 18 months. Richard knew exactly where those components were coming from, and he knew about the child labor. James felt physically sick as the implications sank in. He knew about Lucy. He knew she was Dr. Morrison's daughter. There's more. Richard has been receiving reports about Lucy's situation through Henderson. He's known where she was this entire time. The betrayal was staggering. While James had been desperately trying to help Lucy, his own uncle had been profiting from her suffering, and worse, he had known exactly who she was and done nothing to help her. James returned to the interview room, where Lucy was just finishing her testimony. As they prepared to leave, Agent Martinez pulled him aside. "Mr. Wellington, Lucy's testimony is going to break this case wide open. But I need you to know that the investigation is going to touch some very wealthy and powerful people. Are you prepared for that? And whatever it takes to protect Lucy and bring the people responsible to justice," James said firmly. But as they drove home, James struggled with how to tell Emma that someone they had trusted and loved had betrayed them in the worst possible way. And he wondered what other secrets Richard might be hiding, and how far he would go to protect himself once he realized that Lucy was now beyond his reach. That evening, as James tucked both girls into Emma's bed, Lucy looked up at him with those wise, dark eyes. "Dad, James, the man I told the FBI lady about, he's someone you know, isn't he?" James hesitated, then decided that Lucy deserved the truth. "Yes, sweetheart, he's my uncle, but what he did was very wrong, and he's going to have to face the consequences." "I'm sorry," Lucy whispered. "I'm sorry that helping me is causing problems for your family." Emma sat up indignantly. "Lucy, you are our family, and we protect our family, no matter what." James kissed both girls goodnight, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. Richard Wellington was not a man who would go down quietly, and James had a feeling that the battle for Lucy's future was about to become a war that would test everything he believed about family, loyalty, and justice. The call came at midnight, waking James from an uneasy sleep. Richard Wellington's voice was cold and controlled, nothing like the warm paternal tone James remembered from his childhood. "James, we need to talk, immediately. Uncle Richard, it's midnight. Whatever this is about can wait until morning." "No, it cannot wait. You've made a serious mistake taking in that Morrison girl, and you're going to fix it before this situation destroys everything our family has built." James felt his anger rise. "Lucy is not a mistake. She's my daughter now, and I will not abandon her. That child is a witness to activities that could implicate Wellington Industries in federal crimes. If she continues to cooperate with the FBI, she could bring down the entire company." "Good," James said flatly. "If the company profited from child abuse and theft, then it deserves to be brought down." There was a long pause before Richard spoke again, his voice now carrying an unmistakable threat. "James, you have 24 hours to return that girl to state custody. If you don't, I will be forced to take more direct action to protect our family's interests." The line went dead, leaving James staring at his phone in disbelief. His uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents' death, who had taught him everything about business and life, was threatening him over Lucy. James immediately called Margaret Chen, Detective Torres, and Agent Martinez. setting up emergency meetings for the next morning. Then he went to check on the girls, finding them both awake in Emma's bed. "Dad, James, who was on the phone?" Lucy asked quietly. "You sounded upset." James sat on the edge of the bed, weighing his words carefully. "Girls, we need to talk about something important. Some people don't want Lucy to stay with us, and they might try to scare us or cause problems." Emma sat up straight, her jaw set with determination that reminded James painfully of Sarah. "What kind of problems?" "I don't know yet, but I want you both to promise me that you won't go anywhere without me or our security team. And if anyone at all, tries to talk to you about Lucy or asks you to go somewhere, you say no and call me immediately." "Are we in danger?" Lucy asked, her voice small but steady. "I won't let anything happen to either of you," James said firmly. "I promise you that." The next morning, James's worst fears were confirmed when Margaret Chen arrived with disturbing news. "James, Richard has filed a motion claiming that you're mentally unfit to adopt Lucy due to unresolved grief over Sarah's death. He's provided testimony from family friends claiming that you've been making erratic decisions since Sarah died." "That's insane. I've never been more clear-headed about anything in my life." "There's more. He's also claiming that Emma is being negatively affected by Lucy's presence, that she's becoming withdrawn and showing signs of psychological distress." James felt his world spinning out of control. "He's trying to use Emma against me." He's also hired a private security firm. Officially, it's to protect Wellington Industries' assets during the FBI investigation. Unofficially, he's planning something, James finished. Agent Martinez arrived an hour later with equally troubling news. "Mr. Wellington, we've intercepted communications suggesting that Richard Wellington is planning to remove Lucy from your custody using private contractors. Essentially, a kidnapping disguised as a legal intervention." "When?" "Soon. Within the next 48 hours, we believe." James felt his protective instincts surge. "What can we do?" "We can provide federal protection for Lucy as a key witness, but it would mean moving her to a safe house until the trial. She might not be able to see you or Emma for weeks, possibly months." James's heart broke at the thought of separating Lucy from Emma again, especially when they were just beginning to heal together. "There's another option," Agent Martinez continued. "We could set up a controlled situation where Richard attempts to take Lucy, allowing us to arrest him in the act. But it would put Lucy at risk, and we'd need her cooperation." That evening, James gathered both girls in his study and explained the situation as gently as possible. Lucy listened carefully, then surprised everyone with her response. "I want to help catch him," she said firmly. "My mama always said that when bad people hurt children, good people have to stop them. If I can help stop your uncle from hurting other kids, then I want to do it." Emma grabbed Lucy's hand. "If Lucy does this, I want to help too." "Absolutely not," James said immediately. "I won't put either of you in danger." "Dad James," Lucy said, using the name that had become precious to all of them, "I've been running from scary people my whole life. But now I have a family to protect me. I'm not afraid anymore." James looked at both girls, Lucy with her quiet courage and Emma with her fierce loyalty, and realized that they were braver than he had ever been. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it together, as a family." Outside in the hallway, unnoticed by any of them, a small listening device transmitted every word of their conversation to a van parked 3 blocks away, where Richard Wellington sat listening with cold calculation. The trap was set, but the question remained, who was really the hunter and who was the prey? The plan was set for Saturday afternoon in Central Park, a location that would seem natural for a family outing while providing the FBI with multiple vantage points and escape routes. James, Emma, and Lucy would be having a picnic near the Bethesda fountain, acting as normal as possible, while federal agents positioned themselves throughout the area. Lucy had been remarkably calm during the briefings, her small hand steady in James's as Agent Martinez explained what might happen. Emma, however, was nervous energy personified, asking a dozen questions about every detail. What if Uncle Richard brings guns? What if he hurts Lucy? What if something goes wrong? Emma fired off her concerns rapid fire. Sweetheart, there are going to be 20 FBI agents watching us, James reassured her. Nothing is going to happen to Lucy. I know, Lucy said quietly, looking at the photograph of her mother that she still carried everywhere. My mama is watching over us too. I can feel her. As they spread their blanket on the grass that beautiful Saturday morning, James marveled at how normal everything seemed. Families surrounded them, children played on the playground nearby, joggers passed by on the paths. It was impossible to believe that somewhere in this peaceful scene, a man James had loved like a father was planning to destroy everything they had built together. At precisely 2 p.m., Richard Wellington appeared, but he wasn't alone. He brought with him 2 men in expensive suits who looked more like corporate lawyers than the private security agents James had expected. Behind them, almost as an afterthought, walked Janet Rodriguez from Child Protective Services, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Hello, James," Richard said, his voice carrying the same warmth it always had, as if nothing had changed between them. "Girls!" Emma moved protectively closer to Lucy, who had gone very still but showed no signs of fear. "Uncle Richard," James said, standing slowly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't." "James, I've come to collect Lucy. Mrs. Rodriguez has the proper paperwork for her immediate return to state custody." Janet Rodriguez stepped forward reluctantly, pulling out a manila folder. "Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry, but new evidence has come to light regarding Lucy's placement. We need to remove her from your home, pending a full investigation." "Burdu, what new evidence?" James asked, though he already knew this was all orchestrated by Richard. "Evidence suggesting that you've been coaching Lucy to lie about her experiences in foster care," Richard said smoothly. "Evidence that you've been using her trauma to advance your own agenda against legitimate businesses." Lucy stood up from the blanket, her small frame somehow commanding attention from every adult present. "That's not true," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the open space. "Dad James never told me to lie about anything. Everything I said about the Henderson house was true." "Lucy, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "Children sometimes remember things differently than they actually happened. The adults need to sort this out properly." "I remember everything exactly," Lucy said, and James was amazed by the strength in her voice. "I remember you coming to the house. I remember you giving Mr. Henderson money for the boxes we made in the basement, and I remember you asking about me specifically." Richard's facade cracked slightly. "You're mistaken, child." "No, I'm not," Lucy continued, pulling out her mother's photograph. "You told Mr. Henderson that I looked just like my mama. You said my mama was Dr. Elena Morrison, and that she had helped your family once. You said you were sorry she died." The color drained from Richard's face as he realized that Lucy remembered far more than he had anticipated. "You knew who I was the whole time," Lucy continued, her voice growing stronger. "You knew I was the daughter of the doctor who saved Emma's mommy. But instead of helping me, you let me stay in that terrible place because it was good for your business." James felt a surge of pride and heartbreak as he watched this 8-year-old girl stand up to a man who had terrified him. But then Lucy said something that changed everything. "But I know something else too," she continued, looking directly at Richard. "I know that you were at the hospital the night my mama died." Richard went completely still. "What are you talking about?" "The nurse told me that a man came looking for my mama's patient files the night of the accident. She said he claimed to be family, but that he looked through all her records about a little girl with cancer." James felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "You were looking for information about Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You wanted to know about her treatment, her condition." "James, you don't understand," Richard began. "You were already planning this," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "Even before Sarah died, you were setting up the electronic scheme. You knew that Dr. Morrison's operation gave us extra time with Sarah, and you were looking for ways to use that information." Lucy nodded solemnly. "My mama's friend at the hospital told me that the man took copies of files he wasn't supposed to have. She said she always wondered if someone was planning to hurt my mama because she knew too much about something." The implication hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard hadn't just exploited Lucy after her mother's death. He had been investigating Dr. Morrison before the accident, possibly contributing to the circumstances that led to her death. "You killed her," James said, the words coming out as a hoarse whisper. "That's absurd," Richard said, but his hands were shaking now. "Elena Morrison died in a car accident. I had nothing to do with—" "You had her working impossible hours," James interrupted, his voice gaining power. "You made sure she was exhausted, stressed, overworked. You knew she would eventually make a mistake." Agent Martinez stepped out from behind a nearby tree, her badge clearly visible. "Richard Wellington, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit murder." As the handcuffs clicked around Richard's wrists, he looked at James with something that might have been regret. "I was trying to protect the family business, James. Everything I did was for the family." "Lucy is my family," James said firmly. "Emma is my family. You were just a man who forgot what family actually means." 3 months later, James stood in the same courthouse where he had once felt powerless against bureaucracy, watching as Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Lucy's mother, but a woman who understood the importance of family, finalized Lucy's adoption. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," Judge Morrison said with a smile, "I hereby declare that Lucy Elena Morrison Wellington is now the legal daughter of James Wellington and the legal sister of Emma Wellington." Lucy's new middle name honored her mother, while her new last name gave her the family she had always deserved. That evening, as they sat together in the rooftop garden where this whole journey had begun, Lucy looked up at the stars and spoke to her mother one last time. "Mama, I found them. I found the brave girl and her daddy, just like you said I would. And now we're a family, and we're going to take care of each other forever." Emma squeezed her sister's hand. "Your mama and my mommy are probably friends up there, watching over us together." James pulled both girls close, finally understanding that the greatest inheritance he could give them wasn't money or status or security. It was the knowledge that families are built not by blood or law, but by love, courage, and the willingness to fight for each other no matter what. "I love you both," he whispered into the night air, knowing that Sarah and Dr. Elena Morrison were indeed watching over them, proud of the family their daughters had chosen to become. And in that moment, under the stars that had guided them to each other, James, Emma, and Lucy were exactly where they belonged, together at last forever.